It was on February the 13th, and we had the very first sit-in here in Nashville. And I took my seat at the counter. I asked the waitress for a hamburger and a Coke.
I said, I'm sorry, our management does not allow us to serve niggers in here.
My brothers, I'm glad. I'm glad to have the opportunity to tell people today that they're sleeping in a dangerous time. Rise, 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 rise. I'm here in the midst of all of these things today. I feel so glad that I've got the opportunity to tell men to run. Run, 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 run. Men and women that hadn't made a start to go before, to pull up and do something for your race. Wake up, go and make a start and see if God will catch a hold of you.
In 1954, the historic Supreme Court decision on public school desegregation presented that area of the United States, traditionally known as the South, with its first region-wide crisis in race relations of the 20th century. 6 years later, in 1960, the South is again faced with a crisis in race relations of perhaps even greater significance, the sit-in movement. It comes at a time of sweeping social and political changes among the colored peoples of the world. And in our own country, it has challenged certain fundamental concepts of law, affected the conduct of national politics, and is shaking the regional traditions of the South in an entirely new way. In this NBC white paper, we shall examine the phenomenon of the sit-in, focusing on the one city where it had its clearest and most significant expression, Nashville, Tennessee. In Nashville, on April 19th, 1960, 4,000 Negroes marched angrily on City Hall to bring to a climax 2 months of tension and violence that had enveloped a once peaceful city. This is the story of those 2 months.
I am Ben West, and this is my city. For the past 10 years, I have been its mayor. I have watched it grow from an overgrown country town into a great metropolitan complex. While Nashville is a city, yet the ways of its people are small townish. Here we know each other, speak to each other. The morning greeting is commonplace. The people are not country yokels. They're well-educated, and they're cosmopolites too. Here we have many pleasant surroundings. The beautiful state capitol, which was designed by the great architect William Strickland. The many, many old buildings that have such historic value to us. Out in Centennial Park, you will see the Parthenon. This Parthenon is the only exact replica of the Parthenon on the Acropolis in Athens, Greece, and we are very proud of that. Nashville has been called the Athens of the South. We think we have earned this fine title with our rich background of culture.
Nashville is considered to be the Athens of the South, and I suppose this is true in several ways. The old Athens, the ancient Athens, was a place of both shame and glory. And I think this is true of our Athens of the South here. There are certainly the aspects of glory in the city of Nashville, its progress, its culture, its educational institutions, and things of this sort. This is the glory of Nashville, that Negroes are to be found on some levels in our city government. We have city councilmen. We have 2 Negro city councilmen. We have a Negro on the transit board. We have a Negro who serves on our school board. But it's to the shame of Nashville that when you go down to the city hall, not only do you see segregation signs on the restrooms, but you see the signs of segregation in other places. Stores where you can come in as a customer, but if you come in as an employee, it is only in a very menial capacity. You will serve as a porter or something of that sort, or as a customer for certain goods, that is, goods other than food. There were virtually no places downtown where Negro citizens could get a cup of coffee, a hamburger, or a meal. Therefore, we felt that something has to be done about this kind of situation. It isn't a matter of choice. It isn't an order that comes from somebody else. It's an order that comes from within, which says you must move against this if you are to really be able to live with yourself.
The impulse that led to the sit-in movement had been growing for some time, and it was the Negro college students in Nashville and in other cities who would bring it into action. The background of these students was a religious one, and in addition, many of them had been inspired by the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi as applied by the Reverend Martin Luther King. A few of the students had prepared to put theory into practice by attending workshops in which they rehearsed for the ordeal they would have to undergo when they began sitting in at white lunch counters.
When an idea is something I've never heard of, I like to explore and see what it really is. So I went to this workshop, and on this particular night, they were having some role playing. And in some of the scenes, you almost cried because they would have someone playing the part of nigger. Nigger! Yeah, let's play it. These sort of comments, they touch to your soul, and they make you realize that it's all the more important that you do something about it. February 13th was our first sit-in Nashville. On this sit-in, we had about 130 kids. I think on this day, many of us didn't realize just how important our movement would grow to be.
The targets of the Nashville students were the lunch counters at the city's 2 largest department stores and 4 variety stores. And for the first time, the community was confronted with Negroes in places where they had never been.
You go to a counter. You do not request that the person sitting next to you get up and leave. You merely come in and sit down beside him, as any human being would do. You cause no violence. You have no angry words. You're friendly, and it sort of helps to project the idea that here sits beside me another human being.
Altogether, it was a moving feeling within me that I was sitting there demanding a God-given right, and my soul became satisfied that I was right in what I was doing. At the same time, with something deep down within me, moving me, that I could no longer be satisfied or go along with an evil system, that I had to be maladjusted to it. And in spite of all of this, I had to keep loving the people who denied me service, who stared at me.
During the early weeks of February 1960, the demonstrations that came to be called the sit-in movement exploded across the South. Within a period of 2 months, the movement had spread to 65 cities involving every southern state, with the exception of Mississippi. The new tactic came as a surprise, creating bewilderment and confusion in the white communities and even among the Negroes themselves.
Hey, this letter I got from my mother, it sort of disturbed me. It hurts me in a way, man. She said, "Dear son, I was glad to hear from you. I'm sorry, too, because I didn't sleep all night praying and crying and thanking God. He's been so good to you. What are you fighting for? You don't have a family, yet you remember who are helping you in school. It is the white people. What about the people of your race? Well, what are they giving you? Remember, don't hurt yourself. Remember, your advisor asked the white people to help you. They did. So you don't want to fight the people who are trying to help you. Remember, God will straighten out everything if you just give him time. You don't have to eat with the white people. And you live all these years, just pray and trust in God. You're not learning your lesson in school. God is nobody to play with. You're just making disturbance." See, she didn't even give her complimentary clothes or anything. She's really upset, man, but gosh, man. I mean, I know she cares for me, you know. I mean, I know she loves me, but man, she just don't understand. She just don't understand. You see what I mean?
I think that people who strive to gain social acceptance through although they're called nonviolent or passive resistance, they're the most violent. I also think that it is in violation to my civil rights. If someone can say, "You must serve me," if a man owns an eating establishment, if he can't choose whom he pleases to serve or not to serve, that can affect me and you and anyone else.
I would say that they should examine the white person very closely first to see whether or not they're going about it in the right way. Now, if I'm a businessman and people that I do not want in my business insist on either coming in or boycotting, which is their perfect right to do, then certainly it's not going to make me love them.
Breaking bread is essentially a family custom, almost a sacrament. Now, when you claim that you have been denied equal rights in participating in something that is regarded as a family custom or sacrament, and insist on being recognized, you're getting into dangerous ground, and ground that can be misconstrued, and in which you can be wrong. Now, the people in the South have always fed people who came and knocked at the back door and asked for something to eat. But they have always reserved the right to eat only with invited guests.
I have thought for a long time that Negroes should be allowed to sit at the counters where we are served downtown. This is just a part of many things that I think they should be allowed to do. I have felt that it really was not fair for them to be served in the stores as customers and not be allowed certain services, denied certain services within those same stores.
It's just like one snake could like a snake of his own kind better than another, maybe. something like that. I mean, a lion might like another lion better than it would a bear. That's just like white people and niggers. I mean, white people naturally gonna like white people better than they're niggers.
Well, it's just not the things we're used to down here. I mean, they come in and they sit down, and we're not used to them sitting down beside us, because I wasn't raised with them. I never have lived with them, and I'm not going to start now.
During the weeks after the sit-ins began, opposition in the white communities of the South solidified, and the first signs of violence appeared. Those few whites who sympathized publicly with the sit-ins soon found themselves to be prime targets. One of these was a young divinity student in Nashville, Wilson Yates.
Well, I was downtown with a friend around Memorial Square. I'd actually gone back to put a nickel in the meter. My car happened to be parked by Memorial Square where the picketing was going on. And suddenly, we moved into a different world. There were the crowds shouting, "Niggers go home," and then there were the Negro students who were carrying posters asking for equal opportunity. And being thrown in the situation of the crisis, I had to act, and I had no other choice than to respond as I did. So I walked over and I asked the Negroes if it would help or harm if I carried a poster. They said it would help. Right before I went over, some white boys had entered the ring carrying derogatory posters like "Go home, coon," and "Send the bunnies home." And I entered the ring, and I started walking around. I was with a friend. One of the white boys walked over to this friend. He said something to him.
I told him when he come around on the white side, I just going to hit him one time.
Here I was in the raw, walking around a square carrying a poster which said "Equal rights for all." And the crowds on each side yelling, "Get rid of the nigger lover, tell the nigger lover to go home." And they were referring to me. The boy came towards me. He cursed me out.
Yeah, because he was white, taking up for the nigger. That really got me over when them two white boys started carrying signs for the niggers over.
And then the momentum began to build from the crowd, and they said, "Hit the nigger lover, hit the nigger lover." And then there's that strange, long, lonely feeling where you're waiting for something to happen, and you don't know what's going to happen, but somehow, down deep, you're ready for it. And he walked up behind me.
I reached and grabbed that Yates boy and just see how hard I could hit it.
He hit me in the back of the neck. I lurched forward, but I didn't fall. I regained my balance, and then in the midst of it, with the shouting and the jeering and the crowd of people, I suddenly felt this tremendous humiliation. Suddenly, I had crossed into another race. I'd moved into a different world. I was a Negro feeling all of the rejection and humiliation he must have to go through every time he's rejected.
On the morning of the 27th, this was to be our first real violent day. It was the first time when we could really test our own convictions as far as nonviolent means were concerned. 5 ministers said to us, "If you go downtown today, you're going to be arrested. Please don't go downtown because we're not prepared. We should have community behind us." Paul LaPrade, he was one of the few white students who were with us. They always pick on the white students because they hate to see white sympathizers.
I saw a bunch of coloreds sitting on the stools. They looked like a bunch of idiots sitting up there waiting for people to try to throw them off, and they looked like they were just trying to egg on a fight.
None of us looked back, but yet we could see everything that was going on through the long mirror. And it seems to me that when it happened, that all of us wanted to be hit. This was an experience that we needed to keep our movement going, to keep ourselves going, and to convince ourselves that we really were nonviolent.
On February 27th, was on Saturday afternoon. I was cruising down Fifth Avenue. In front of McClellan's, a man came out and said that there was a fight on the inside. There had been a disturbance, but there was a bunch of colored boys and girls on the stools in the counters. And the management asked that they leave, and I instructed him to ask them to leave, and they did not leave. I went and asked each and every one of them separately to leave. They didn't leave, so I instructed the men to place them under arrest. We placed them under arrest.
The policemen, they gave me an alternative. They said, son, you can sit here on the stool and act a fool, or you can get up and go home. And I made my choice. I decided that I would keep my seat. And they told me I was under arrest, and then they took me away.
When we cleared the stools, some more colored boys and girls and white boys and girls got on the seats. When we told them that they were under arrest and they had to leave, well, they got up. But as far as having anything personal against them or anything against them because they were either black or white, we arrested in this crowd several white boys and girls. It was just a case where we had to clean this man's store out, and we did it.
I'm C.E. Warren, turnkey at City Jail. I've never seen anything like it when they brought these kids in.
On February 27th, 80 Nashville students were arrested out of over 300 who were participating in the sit-ins that day. The first of a series of wholesale arrests throughout the South.
You're in jail. I'm joking. Man, what my mother gonna say when she hear about that?
The mother of 2 students who were in jail.
Well, there was plenty of anxiety on my part, but I always think of what Matthew Jr. told me. And when he called from the jail, he said, "Be cool, Mother." And that was very trying, and yet it was amusing too. He's telling me to be cool at this point. So even now, when I think of it, I get quite a bit of fun out of it. Just hearing him say it, I can't say it as he said it, but he said, "Be cool, Mother." And I tried to be cool. So I felt, though, that there would be safety for them, because I felt that our faith in God would help to bring them through this safely.
The experience of being in jail together was a bond that unites the students even today.
Except the people in our cell. We didn't have to sing because Harry, you know, he has a big mouth. We heard him singing Dale all night long.
You better find it.
Harry,
Come on, better find it.
Come on. Who, me? Not me, but you. Just holler Dale for us.
Just say Dale for us.
Roll your boat, man.
Dale, come on, Dale.
Dale, he's out Dale. Daylight come and we wanna go home. Hey, he's out there. Daylight come and we wanna go home. And we come like for a drink of rum. Daylight come and we wanna go home. We come night till the morning comes. Daylight come and we wanna go home. Hey, he's out there. Daylight come and it wanna go home. Daylight come and it wanna go home. 6 foot, 7 foot, 8 foot punch. Daylight come and it wanna go home. 6 foot, 7 foot, 8 foot punch. Daylight come and it wanna go home. Dale, he's out there.
Tonight, you know, I had a date the night we were in jail with my girl, you know. I had a date and I found out.
I know how lonesome you feel. You're real fortunate. My girl wouldn't even come to see me.
You got me here.
I got involved in it. All I know is I was walking down the street and the fellas told me, said, "Come on, man, we're going to get a couple of hamburgers."
So I said, okay, you know. So we walk down, we walk in this place, and we sit down. So immediately a crowd gathers around, and I wonder what they're looking at. All I want is a hamburger, you know.
So what about the coffee?
The coffee, you know. I wanted a little coffee, too, to wash the hamburger down. And people come up, and they said, I'm sorry, we don't serve you. And I said, but I'm hungry. And then the next thing I know, somebody was tapping on my back with a what you call those things? Nightstick. A nightstick. He said, let's go. So I said, all right, well, maybe we're going to another cafeteria.
That reminds me of a cartoon I saw the other day. It had a lunch counter, and the waitress is behind it, and they had a Negro sitting on one of the counter stools, and the caption under it read, "The customer is always white."
It reminds me of another joke. Hey, you know what happened when this guy went into the segregated counter to eat? The waitress came up to him and said, "I'm sorry, sir, but we don't serve Negroes." So he jumps back, horrified, shocked, you know. You don't serve Negroes? Well, I mean, that won't bother me because I don't eat them.
Until the arrest of the 80 students, the sit-ins in Nashville had involved only a small segment of the city's 100,000 Negroes. But now, on February 29th, as trial of the students began, the entire Negro population would soon find itself involved.
I'm John I. Harris. I was sitting as special judge in the city court during the sit-in demonstrations here in Nashville in the early part of this year. There was a hot spot for me as there was much pressure coming from both sides. The courtroom was full, newspaper men, photographers, lawyers, and colored people and white people. And it was very hard to sit there and listen to all these pressure groups and listen to the lawyers and the defense police and all the defendants. Pretty hot spot. It came time when a man had to make up his own mind what the law was and if that law had been violated. Now, there have been some false accusations from the colored lawyers that I had prejudged the case on the bench. There is no truth or found on none of these accusations. I take it as an intimidation from the lawyers that they might help them in their case. The city prosecutor put on their proof, the defendants put on their proof. They wasn't rushed, they had all the time they needed. And the final analysis, I had to make a decision. I made that decision. I found the defendants guilty because they had violated the law, and they should be punished.
Judge Harris fought in order to appeal the decision, an appeal which is still unresolved. But at the time of sentencing, as the students were confronted with the choice of paying a $1 fine or spending over a month in jail, each of them chose jail. Their attitude reflected the words of Reverend Martin Luther King, who in a speech made in Nashville at the time said, "The capacity to inflict suffering with the capacity to endure suffering. We will say, do what you will to us, but no." Following the student trials, as unrest continued in the city, the mayor appointed a biracial citizens committee. One member was lawyer George Barrett.
What concerned the mayor's committee and the Negroes about the trials and arrests was what it was doing to the community. You could begin to feel the impact of this sort of thing. That really, it was hard to convince lots of white people that the Negroes were really serious. The first attitude was, you know, it's spring and panty raids and students will be students, and these kids, instead of running to the girls' dormitories, are down here sitting in at Cress's or Woolworth's or Harvey's or Kane Sloan. This was the first reaction, I think, of a large number of white people. I think some of the Negroes were apprehensive about the method. What really crystallized it and unified the Negroes was the way the police handled it. The mass arrest, the subsequent trials, the convictions, the sort of growing feeling among the Negroes that they were really being pushed for something that, after all, they could go in these stores and be waited on in every other county. Then the white people began to feel maybe there was something a little bit more to it. But then one of the leading merchants told me at the mayor's committee, we were talking, I said, now, Mr. So-and-so, do you remember what happened in Montgomery when 40,000 Negroes walked across the county for 18 months, merely over segregated bus seating? I said, don't you think that can happen in this city, and do you realize what it would do? And he sort of ran back and he said, well, I really don't think the Negroes in Nashville do anything like that to us.
Student sit-ins in Nashville certainly did arouse this community. I think not only were the people of the Negro community bewildered, that is, the total community bewildered, but this question of what can I do in this situation certainly preyed on the minds of people. And of course, one of the things that did come out of it was the discovery, so to speak, of their effective economic purchasing power, and that they could use this to support the students. It's really seldom that an economist has an opportunity to put his research to work in programs involving social action, but the student sit-in movement really gave me the opportunity to put theory into practice. For many years, the Negro was a low-income recipient, and he didn't have a great deal to offer the business houses, and he was taken for granted as a customer. But since the war, and particularly in 1960, there's been a tremendous change in the income status of the Negro, and as a result, he does have money now that's worth competing for. The Negroes have not been aware to any large extent of their economic power, particularly at the local level. At the national level, while there has been a lot of awareness about the so-called $17 billion Negro market, which in 1960 now is well over $21 billion per year in purchasing power. And they are aware of it in the aggregate sense. But at the local level, the awareness really did not exist. And it took the sit-ins to bring this awareness around when we really began the pronouncements as to what the Negroes actually spend in this Nashville community. From the Nashville inner city, that is the central city itself, the buying power of Negroes runs close to $60 million per year. But I think the important thing here is that downtown in the target area, that Negroes spend about $10 million a year, and it was this particular area that gave us a target that really enabled us to have an effective economic withdrawal. I'll never forget on the first night that we had a mass meeting that I said from the pulpit, and in my own moment of anxiety and perhaps anger at the developments, that any Negro who went downtown and traded at the stores where these kids had been mistreated as they had was really nothing else but a darn fool. And there was really no excuse for anyone supporting discrimination after the course of events that had taken place in Nashville during those 3 days. And frankly, I think that this kind of stimulation actually went a long ways toward motivating the Negroes to respond to this economic withdrawal. They actually got angry, in other words. They found this weapon, and they were willing to use it, and they wanted to whip the merchants with the best weapon they had at their disposal under those conditions. And really, that weapon happened to have been the economic withdrawal.
According to local mythology, the economic boycott began with a group of 4 women who were playing bridge.
We saw the students being herded into the patrol cars, and I was just so moved that I went to the telephone immediately and began calling 50 people, asking them to call 10 more, encouraging people not to trade downtown.
Well, you know, I called at random. I would just get the telephone book each day and just pick out 10 names. That was my duty. I was going to do that. And sometimes I would get white people. So I talked to one white lady. I said, have you heard the word? And she said, well, yes, honey. She said, I said, are you colored? She said, no, I'm white. She said, but my husband said, anything that keeps me from downtown, it's good to join it.
Well, look, I had such a hard time about my style. You know, I like very sheer hose. I like them a certain shade. Do you know I was wearing hose that were almost white? Girl, they were terrible. I really had a time.
Yeah, because when you get
I
accustomed to
decided that we have a lot of wants which are manufactured for us by the advertising. So I decided that I was going to wear hose with runs in them. Oh dear. But as far as clothes and that kind of thing, I really have lost interest in dressing.
Well, you got a closet full of junk. You know, don't we all have?
Don't wear out.
And you know, my baby needed a winter coat. And I would have gone downtown, and I guess I would have paid, at least $20 for a coat, because to get a nice coat, a heavy coat that will last 2 years, it costs at least $20 or maybe $25. And I said, well, this child has to have a coat. I went to the Goodwill. Oh, no. I found the best coat. Girl, it was marvelous. Yeah. I found it for $2. I got the best coat. Sure. I'm proud of it, really. I mean, well, heck, I've been going back there ever since.
Because it really, it boils down, you have a lot of false pride. And your food, a place to stay. You know, it was good, though, from this point of view. There were many whites who actually didn't know what we had been going through all these years.
Hadn't thought about it.
They hadn't given it a thought.
Hadn't thought about it.
And to me, as a citizen, did nothing else than to focus the attention on it.
Wrongs.
And I'm saying, frankly, from here on out, every meeting that's fighting for democracy, I'm for it. I'm going to work with it. All of us should really be ashamed of ourselves. Maybe we just spent too much time playing bridge. And
not as Lord and the slave, see. See, the day of Uncle Tom is dead. Well, he just hasn't been buried, but he's dead now, see. He's dead. Well, he's gone.
Do you think that this sort of thing would be an effective weapon in the future for Negroes obtaining their rights?
It's always effective as long as they stand together. That's something we haven't felt before, you know. We always feel that we are alone in this thing. That anytime anything happens, it happens to me alone. But once we get the feeling that it happens to all of us, and happens to us at the same time, it'd be a different thing.
To give you an idea of the spirit of the people, I was in a group who, within a period of a half an hour, subscribed to a tremendous amount of money, 8 people. And never would I have thought that that could happen. So that was a good indication of the spirit of the people. I thought that the economic boycott would last until everybody was completely broke and we do nothing.
But we think of our students as being the very best that we have to offer. In fact, it is our future, our students are. And when our students are treated as the very worst elements of our society, then that makes us, all of us, become more aware of the moral implications of it, the economic implications of it. We've always heard that money speaks, and we felt sure that money does speak. But we felt we had so little that it made such a small voice, it wasn't important in our doing anything about it, because we'd be classed as being crazy. But when the whole community rallied behind something, as they rallied behind the students, then it made a tremendous impact. The Negroes stayed away from downtown, and they stayed away from downtown for the fact that they wouldn't support segregation. That was a sole issue.
It wasn't very much trouble for me because we had a daughter in jail, and we could pretty easily get it over to us. We were pretty raggy around Easter, but we held out all right.
Well, it's a wonderful thing about Easter, though. You know, we always buy a lot of new clothes for Easter, and you just got to have this and you just got to have that. It seemed like we all took a great pride in not buying things for Easter.
Well, I never had so good.
Pocketbook-wise.
That's right, pocketbook-wise.
Go ahead.
Didn't go downtown at all, didn't buy anything. We paid out all the bills, every account. And during that time, bought nothing. And I, personally, I wouldn't mind it happening again, or something like that anyway, on that score.
The Negro has a terrific purchasing power. Their standard of living and their earning power has been increased tremendously, I would say, in the last 10 or 15 years. And they have a large amount of money to be spent now, and they spend it very, very fluently. So the merchants, of course, was feeling the pinch because they were definitely not coming downtown to spend that money. The uptown streets were absolutely forsaken of any Negroes. Made it a point to go around to the different stores up and down Church Street all in all, it was reaching some rather staggering and serious proportions.
Well, the boycott pretty well killed business downtown. I'd say it was roughly 95% effective as far as the Negro citizens staying away from downtown area completely. For us, it was pretty unfortunate. The violence that had preceded the boycott kept the white people out of town, and then none of the Negroes were coming to town, and I sort of felt like the only customers we had left were the green people, and there aren't too many of them. So our business suffered, as I'm sure did everybody else's. We just didn't have any traffic for about a month there. It was pretty rough.
What was really disturbing about it, I think, was that you could see the potential of the city for the first time destroying itself. You could see long years of good relations built up between Negroes and whites being destroyed by the struggle going on, by the attitude of the Negroes, and they felt they were right, by the adamant attitude of the merchants in that they would not move because they were afraid of the consequences of such a change on their white customers, and the fact that they didn't feel that they should lead such a change in the community. What was really frightening about the whole thing was, I think, that you could really see the city destroying itself in two armed camps, so to speak, ending up one Negro, one white, and the end of any real progress over a long period of years.
I talked to some people, and they were very fearful that it could get to very serious proportions here. Because, as I told you, as I mentioned, it's an emotional issue. And the rougher element, they're just looking for something to really get into the melee at all times. Just a certain element that prevails in every city, that they're looking for just some good opportunity to become involved in.
On March the 2nd, I was on my job in the arcade beauty salon. All of a sudden, there was a commotion outside, down below.
We had slingshots up there with staples down, shooting the niggers up there, trying to get a good fight started up there. And this colored boy in the arcade window out there, and you can see out on the street up there.
And then they said, let's get the coon. Let's get the coon, bring the coon down. Why? I asked myself, why? What have I done? Why is this to me? It was a feeling that never could be expressed by anyone unless it happened to them.
Early on the morning of April 19th, the violence in Nashville reached its climax with the dynamiting of a Negro home. This was the residence of Alexander Luby, a city councilman and leading Negro attorney.
He was Attorney Luby. He was our lawyer. He came to our defense when we were arrested that day, when we really needed something, and somebody had tried to kill him. We felt we had to confront the mayor with this thing. At first, we didn't know quite what to do. But the idea of the massive walk seemed to emerge from everybody's mind, really. It was a spontaneous sort of thing. And we walked, we held our heads high because we were right. And we knew we were walking for something right. We were really striding toward freedom. It was a wonderful feeling. It was magnificent. We felt unity, we felt power, we felt strength. And it's not very often that a human being is exposed to such a raw feeling of goodness. I don't think any of us will ever forget it. Here was a situation in which two forces were meeting head on, and there had to be a showdown. He had to say something.
Well, I felt like that here were a group of youngsters that were
outraged because their leader's home had been dynamited. And I felt outraged along with them. And to that extent, we had a community of feeling between us that made me have a feeling that really we were after the same thing, and that I was as outraged as they were by this horrible thing, and that the great majority of the thinking white people were outraged by such a thing. We just couldn't let a thing like that happen. And so we had this discussion down here in front of the City Hall, and I was glad to discuss it with them.
Well, this was the very first time that I personally had ever felt the mayor's presence as a human being, because up until this moment, he had always been a name on a sign that I had seen. But now, I felt a real concern for him. I could sympathize with his situation because he was really on a spot. Here were 5,000 people who were really angry at him in a sense, because we felt that he should have done something that he hadn't done, and we were telling him so. And I'm sure he must have felt rather alone at that moment.
I'd been asked, were you afraid? Of course I wasn't afraid. These children were emotionally upset, and I recognized that they were and tried to treat them with all due respect and courtesy and let them know that I was willing to meet with them there or any other way. But the mere fact that there were thousands of them didn't intimidate me in the least, and I tried to tell them factually and straightforward as I could that all the laws were going to be enforced, and that if they violated the law, they were going to be arrested too. But I did recognize that they were really upset about it, and I felt that they were justifiably upset about this horrible thing that had happened.
And we needed him to say integrate the counters, or to tell Nashville to do what Nashville knows it should have done a long time ago, like about 95 years ago after the Civil War. So I asked the mayor, first of all, Mayor West, do you feel that it's wrong to discriminate against a person solely on the basis of his race or color?
And so they asked me some pretty soul-searching questions. And one that was addressed to me as a man, and I tried as best I could to answer it frankly and honestly, that I could not agree that it was morally right for someone to sell them merchandise and refuse them service. And I had to answer it just exactly that way.
And we were really very relieved. I think we were very pleased and very happy with our mayor at that moment. And we all applauded. And here was the situation that turned out right.
Of course, I received considerable criticism for it, but had I to answer it again, I would answer it in the same way again, because it was a moral question and was one that a man has to answer and not a politician.
The confrontation at City Hall marked the turning point in Nashville. Soon afterward, a committee of merchant and student representatives met and worked out a plan for desegregating the 6 lunch counters that had been the targets of the sit-ins. The economic boycott was withdrawn, and Nashville became the first major city in the South to permit whites and Negroes to eat together in public places. The Nashville settlement was studied closely by other communities. By midsummer, a total of 27 cities had opened their lunch counters to all customers. There have been no disorders as a result, and none of the merchants affected has reported any loss in business. But the chain reaction started by the sit-ins is far from complete.
I think that the economic withdrawal certainly is going to contribute toward developing some kind of realism on the part of the Southern community, in this sense that I think now they are quite aware of the fact, and perhaps for the first time in many communities such as Nashville, of the tremendous influence that the Negro buying power has on the success and failure of their businesses. I think that the general shock treatment that was given and the general trend will be in the direction of recognition of this economic power, and this in itself will contribute to better racial progress in many areas of our community life.
I think there has been a feeling since Little Rock, since the Supreme Court decisions, that as much as we regret it, that integration is here and will come to pass, and I would like to be able to do as much as I can in a lawful way to prevent its coming or to even impede its coming. But I just recognize the sit-ins as just one more step, I think.
It's hard when one has been living all of his life in the South. It's hard to feel that these are just people because we haven't many opportunities to associate with Negroes. It's hard to break down the barriers of feeling that years and centuries and decades have built up. But again, I just didn't feel much of anything, and I was just real glad. I felt like shaking the hand of these Negroes who were sitting down at the counter.
But I think that if I were called in to advise the Negro race on the basis of what's our best interest for the next century, I would say consolidate your gain in the field of education and become the type of people who would be invited to dinner rather than breaking down the door to eat a piece of pie on the stool next door to a white person.
The things that happened here in Nashville during the past several months helped to mature these students. I heard some of them speak of how they sat at a lunch counter and suddenly grew up because things began to take on meaning for them. Their lives began to take on a note of seriousness, and suddenly they began to get some grasp of the meaning of life itself. They began to get some feel of the fact that a person ought to have a cause for which he can give himself, and a cause which will outlast his own living.
In the winter and early spring of 1960, the efforts of Nashville's Negro college students had led to the integration of lunch counters at 6 department and variety stores. But they were still excluded from eating at the city's downtown drugstores and restaurants, train depot, and a bus terminal. And on November 2nd, only a few weeks ago, they began to march downtown again to launch a new round of sit-ins that are still going on. The sit-ins in Nashville today are by no means unique. Each day, news reports reflect their presence throughout the South. From a legal point of view, it's still undetermined whether the sit-ins violate the private property rights of the store owners, and a Supreme Court test is expected. One may disagree with the sit-in tactic as a means of achieving the human aspirations of the Negro, and some will disagree with the aspirations themselves. But perhaps the most important thing is to realize not only that they exist, but that Negro leaders of the immediate future are demanding that they be satisfied and are impatient with the slow pace of traditional change. The sit-in is the dramatic spearhead of a changing mood, and behind it is the Negro's growing awareness of their economic power, the ultimate weapon in achieving without violence what they feel is their right. What we are witnessing is a new kind of militancy, and with it, a new kind of soldier.
Oh, the manager, he was wild.